Hi, Ken Davis here. As you may know, we're closing down Chicago Newsroom next week, and the program's going to end its nearly 10-year run on the Memorial Day weekend. These last couple of shows are going to be short conversations with some of Chicago Newsroom's best friends. Folks like Hal Dardick and Carol Felsenthal, people who very early on gave us their time and shared their knowledge and helped set the tone for our show. And I did want to take this opportunity to thank a bunch of CanTV people. Greg Buzel, who was a big shot here at the time, who asked me to come on board and talk to them about developing a weekly news-oriented show. I loved that idea. And for every one of these 450 shows, Rob Galletta has been in the control room directing the show and a million other jobs. To Kenny Borst and Louis Roman and Chris Wilkinson, and until very recently, Kerry Ruckel, who've each spent literally a couple thousand hours working on cameras and audio boards and switchers and editing software to make the show happen. And to Dave Resnick, our producer, who signed on a while back. And a big thanks to CanTV's executive director, Jim McVeigh, who's been very supportive of the show. So with a huge round of thanks to all of you who've watched and listened over the past decade, on with the show.
From Chicago's CanTV, this is Chicago Newsroom.
It's Chicago Newsroom right here on CanTV. I'm Ken Davis, and as you've heard, we're going to bring some friends in today. And this one is kind of a special friend because Hal Dardick you first came on the show right from the very beginning. You were one of our very earliest interviews.
Yeah, I know. I was here early on in that first, couple months. I'm not sure exactly.
Well, I got to tell you that, and I'm not exaggerating this. When we knew that we had you and I think John Byrne on the same show, if I remember correctly, the two of you, and I remember thinking,
my partner in crime.
Yeah, and I remember thinking, this show is going to make it. If we can get those guys to come down to CanTV and talk to us, like when these guys can be on all the big shows, we're going to have a chance at this. So in a really sort of weird way, just getting you guys on was a real thrill for us. And you've been on many times since, and I just wanted to express my thanks to you for that.
Well, thanks for having me. The thing I like about your show is compared to some of the other shows I've done. I won't mention names, but I don't have to speak in sound bites.
Yeah.
I can elaborate on the reporting I've done or what I know, and it's an intelligent discussion, and I've always appreciated that. And that's why I kept coming back.
Thanks. Well, that's what we tried to do. That's what we set out to do. So enough of this morose stuff about ending everything.
Yeah. Can I cry a little bit?
No. It is the most anticipated ending since Game of Thrones, but
It is, but you'll have binge watching. On the CanTV website.
CanTV binge watching at cantv.org and chicagonewsroom.org, by the way. So I thought it would be really great to just kick this whole cavalcade off with you, because we could actually talk a little bit about what's going on right now. I got to tell you, and you don't have to react to this, I'm just going to say this. I find myself this last couple of days waking up in the morning with like this almost irrational optimism about Lori Lightfoot. I mean, I know it's going to get dashed. I know that in 3 months I'm going to be completely like everybody else saying, boy, the failed Lightfoot administration. But right now it just feels like the tone is good.
Yeah, I thought the speech that she gave the other day when she was inaugurated set a good tone. She was both aspirational and talking about Chicago for everyone, and also sort of laid down the line with the aldermen in a strong way. I think people underestimate her toughness. But I also think that the things that she faces with the crime problem, which is a little better than it's been in the past few years, but persists and is not good. The CTU is already rattling their sabers. They didn't even give her
for the candidate they didn't endorse.
Yeah, right. And you have a budget hole that at last report is at least, I think, going to be $720 million that she's got to solve in the next few months to pass a 2020 budget. So it's there's a lot of hope and potential, and having someone that wasn't really somebody sent.
Yeah, well, that's for sure. Nobody sent her.
To City Hall. But I also think that people ought to get realistic and temper their expectations a little bit, because there's only so much you can do, and until she gets that. I've always been a believer in observing government, that if you don't have your budget in order, it's well nigh impossible to address any of the other problems, because unfortunately everything, for the most part, you can have tone and ethics and that's all good, but to get things done it takes a certain amount of money.
Well, the budget is the like physical manifestation of your policies, right? I mean, that's you can have policies, but if they don't appear in that budget on a line, they're not going to be policies.
Right. So I don't really envy her that task. The other thing about all this hope, and I think I've heard Mayor Lightfoot, it's new to me.
Weird, yeah, I know,
Mayor Lightfoot say this herself, and she was like, everybody was, the lightning that she captured in that bottle to win this race was the fact that there was the indictment or the charge against Ed Burke, the wire, the Danny Solis war, and then the things we learned about that got him into the position to wear that wire, and the old way was under fire from the Dirksen building, from the feds, and she is an ex-prosecutor and someone that talked a lot about ethics. And she handled it really well. She and I think a lot of credit goes to Joanna Klonsky, her campaign consultant, very, very astute young woman. But she captured that, but that angst that is going on in that mood of people being fed up with City Hall. But at the same time, we've never seen her govern like we did Preckwinkle, so we had lots of stuff to say, oh, you didn't do that right, you didn't do this right, but Mayor Lightfoot wasn't in that position. And she was like a tabula rasa. People projected all kinds of things onto that image that they wanted to see, and we don't necessarily know exactly how she'll govern it.
It's grotesque to make the comparison, but there's a very clear line comparison to Trump. I mean, it's the same kind of thing. It's someone who'd never been in government, who just...
Well, she had been in government, but not,
I'm sorry, not elected. Had never been elected to government, and who just tapped into something, just tapped into a feeling that we just want to throw this all out, and we want somebody to go in there and just do it all differently.
I think this is my first chance to say Zeitgeist on TV. She did capture that moment.
So I always shy away from trying to ask real reporters for predictions, but what are the chances, we can ask it in these broad terms, that she's going to be able to get Waguespack and her pack in there to run all the different committees?
I'd say the odds are in her favor. She was, I think, by design, by design, picked a sort of broader spectrum of committee chairmen while giving Scott Waguespack the Finance Committee, the most powerful post, although I think you'll see the powers of that committee diminished.
And he probably will be participating in diminishing
and he probably will. He probably will. And Scott wasn't going to win the city council, prom king contest, but I think the fact that she kept Michelle Harris in rules, who was an old school politician, and she brought in other people who are seen as popular among their colleagues, and she created more committees. She spread it out enough for enough people to have a vested interest that that's going to be approved, I think.
And
the bigger question beyond that is the people that are at least shouting now, Ray Lopez,
Yeah.
Tony Beale,
Yeah.
whether they try to put together some coalition to thwart her initiatives
Right.
later on.
And they've got a very interesting political calculus to make, because they have a very short window of time to determine whether they think that she's going to be weak enough that they can challenge her, or to get in line because this is a steamroller and they're going to get under it if they don't do something.
Right. Well, I think some of them will certainly vote no in protest.
Yeah.
But I think as I said, the other calculation is maybe longer term, and when she comes in with her budget, and it's going to be difficult. There's going to have to be a set of cuts and tax increases to balance that budget, and that's when the rubber hits the road.
Yeah, and there are just so many of these. I mean, we could go on just listing them, but when you talk about things like the No Cop Academy, she was on our show very early on after that happened, and was, I think, the first public official that I heard say that she was against it. So she's been against it as long as it's been possible to be against it, but now she's got a fait accompli. I mean, the funding is there. It's going forward.
Right, in the Lincoln Yards.
And the Lincoln Yards. Many of these things. I don't know how I feel about the fact that Rahm Emanuel was so aggressive in his last couple of months of doing these things, that it just seems to me that when you've volunteered not to be mayor anymore and someone else has come in, there should be some amount of deference in these things. But the stakes were so high in all of these, I guess he just felt he had to do it.
Well, I think that the No Cop Academy, it had strong support on the council. I think, and the local aldermen thought it could create some economic development. That's a more complex issue. And I don't think there was necessarily a groundswell of public sentiment in broad terms against it, although there were certainly people on the ground who really didn't want to see that happen, and they had a strong coalition themselves. But the Lincoln Yards, I think, I think there was a lot of public opposition. A lot of aldermen, other than the alderman whose ward it happened to be in, that were very unhappy with that and thought it was too much of a giveaway. The largest TIF in Chicago's history.
I'm fascinated by this complex thing that she's waded into with aldermanic prerogative, because that sort of started. My sense of it is that came into public consciousness with the building up in the 41st Ward, where there was a big controversy about whether there were going to be poor people moving into a predominantly white neighborhood, and the alderman there just blocked it. And then you had the same kind of thing happening with Arena and the 5150 building. So there was a sense that not John Arena in this case, but others, that aldermen can just block a big project just because they want to, just because they don't want something in their neighborhood. And that was how that was where that argument came from. But it got kind of diffused as the argument went along into this thing about awnings and minor zoning changes and so forth.
Right. Well, I think because Burke was trying to, the allegations against him say that he was using a driveway permit for a Burger King to basically sort of extort legal business out of the owners, the wealthy owners of that Burger King. So that the issue of those little things came into focus. I think it's certainly, it's more, people are starting to understand what privilege or prerogative, whichever term you want to use, is now. But I do think it's reared its head. I did a story, and gosh, it may be 8-9 years ago on Alderman Fioretti when he was in office, and the Felony Franks
Franks,
and they couldn't get the sign up because people were worried about the guy was going to hire felons. The guy was trying to do a good thing, but people in the neighborhood weren't keen on the idea of the name of the place, Felony Franks, which You know, it seemed like freedom of speech to me.
Yeah,
but and he eventually lost that, and they lost hundreds of thousands of dollars fighting this in the Congress hotel when he was siding with the unions, and and they were looking for, I forget what the permit was, maybe an outdoor area, I can't remember. But so there's that, and if you look at the, I don't remember the exact numbers, but I've done an analysis of this that we often repeat in the Tribune, of the 30 or so aldermen that have been, you know, convicted in the last 20 or so years. You look at about half of them were convicted because of schemes to get benefits for themselves by wielding prerogatives. So it is this thing that you know, and it exists in every city to some extent. It exists in Chicago, maybe to an extent not seen in any other American city. So I think you're gonna, it has its issues, and yet there is the other side of that. Aldermen say they know best what they want in their words. But but the housing thing brought it into the public consciousness.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you about, because you're no longer covering City Hall per se, you're now an investigative reporter.
Right.
And you've done a lot of stuff on budgets, and I think you really do have your handle on that. Is the excuse me, the deficit that Rahm Emanuel is leaving for Lori Lightfoot different from the one that Daley left Rahm Emanuel? Because I remember that he did a big dramatic thing at the City Club and said, you know, I've just learned that, you know, I have a $650 or whatever it was $1 million structural deficit. And through the years, he's talked about how he's knocked the structural deficit back, and it's, you know, it's almost all gone. But yet, Lori Lightfoot is saying he's leaving her $700 million. Is it a different kind of $700 million?
Yeah, I think his administration actually admitted to that. It is a different kind of thing, and I will be the first to credit former Mayor Emanuel with doing a lot to attempt to straighten out the city's budget, and he moved that forward. He stopped the scoop and toss, borrowing, pushing debt off into the future at higher cost. He stopped using one-time gimmicks, mostly, to fill the budget holes. He did set a ramp, which was designed not to fully take effect until he was done with his second term, to fund the police and fire and the other pension funds, but that's all kicking in now. So it's different in the sense that the structural deficit, the day-to-day operating budget, is the hole in that area is lower than it was. So but the pension, because the actuarial funding, I don't want to get too far into the weeds here, is kicking in. That's going to skyrocket. That's a huge portion of what's going on here. Lightfoot would like to stop borrowing money, as Daley did and Emanuel did, to pay police settlement costs. So you're adding other things onto it. So the structural deficit is small.
Okay, that's something I wanted to clear up, and I was not able to find that an explanation for that.
Right, but I don't think that the public cares for those niceties.
No, I understand. I understand. I understand that a lot. Hal, we're out of time, I'm sorry to say, but it's been a pleasure having you on the show here so many times, and I just really appreciate it. I appreciate what you do for the Tribune, and good luck to the Chicago Tribune. Let's leave it that way.
And good luck to you in retirement or wherever you're going to.
Well, I don't know what it is. Just something else. I haven't figured it out yet.
On your next.
On the next adventure.
Yes.
Well, thank you very much,
right.
Hal Dardick, investigative reporter for the Chicago Tribune. We'll be right back.
This is Chicago Newsroom.
It's Chicago Newsroom, and it's our second to final day, and what we're doing is we're catching up with some old friends, and it's a perfect way to kind of roll the show to a close. Carol Felsenthal is joining us now. Carol has been on the show a number of times. She's a biographer, she's an author, she's I think a blogger for Chicago Magazine. Well, we'll have to talk about that, maybe not so much anymore. And for Politico, she's kind of done a lot of really cool things in journalism. But most important, the reason she's here today is because she's been a great friend of Chicago Newsroom. thank you for all of that, and welcome back.
Well, thank you, and thank you for all the years of having me on to blab away about my favorite subject, politics, and couldn't be a better time.
Yeah,
right?
well, it certainly couldn't, and I mean, I guess we could just kind of like, we could just sort of jump right into politics, if you like. But, you know, we've got, unfortunately, a very short period of time, only about 20 minutes. So you get to direct what we talk about. But I would love to get your sense of this Lori Lightfoot phenomenon. What did you make of it?
I told my relatives and friends to vote for Lori in the primary. I started supporting. I saw something in her, and I still see it, and it's a determined look in her eyes.
Yeah.
And it's her hardscrabble background.
Mm-hmm.
You know, she has her relatives were here for the inauguration, and it was great to see her mother in that bright pink pantsuit, 90 years old. And what a story. A father who was ill as an adult and went into a coma and lost all of his hearing. Mm-hmm. And she ends up at the University of Michigan and then on scholarship at the University of Chicago Law School. And she's a determined, small but energetic person, and I want to see what happens. And then you start following this thing day by day. And yesterday I was particularly interested in the fact that she, canned is not the right word, but she gave walking papers to 7 members of the Chicago School Board.
Yeah.
So this idea of an elected school board, she ran on that, and she's going to appoint 7 new people. I think 7 is the number.
Yeah.
I don't know whether that's by statute or what it is. And then there'll be an effort to get an elected board through, and I hope very much that she stands firmly and pulls every lever she can in Springfield so they don't come up with that 21-member school board, which she said is a recipe for disaster, and I agree.
Of course, the thing that I thought was, like, once you get the taste of this, once you get the taste of having full ability to appoint everybody you want, maybe she'll soften after that. It's like, she just got to appoint the whole board the way she wants it to be. It's not gonna. No elected board is ever going to be as good to her as the board she's going to appoint herself.
That's right, but she has laid down as a foundation that she wants people on that board who have skin in the game of Chicago Public Schools. And I have been told by many editors over the years, and I don't fully believe it, that you don't care where a mayor sends his children to school, or where a president or any top official. Well, I don't really agree with that. I don't think that Lori Lightfoot has an 11-year-old daughter, Vivian. I don't know where she goes to school.
Well, it's not a Chicago public school. She goes to a private school.
Does she? Yeah. I have not seen that reported, and I wondered. So that might be a little bit difficult, but still, wherever her daughter goes to school, and good luck to her, I think the idea that the people on the board should be parents, they should have some connection to the schools, which is something that we have not seen. For example, one person who Rahm appointed to the board, who I have a great deal of respect for, is Austin Goolsbee, University of Chicago economist, worked in the administration of Barack Obama, really not only affable, but smart guy. I don't know this for sure, but I would bet that his kids go to the University of Chicago labs, and of course Rahm's did. So let's see what happens with that.
So one of the questions I've just been burning to ask you is, what's next for Rahm Emanuel? I mean, we've seen that he's kind of like jumping into journalism. He's becoming a writer. I don't know exactly how to describe it. What are you thinking about? What's the next act for Rahm Emanuel?
Well, Rahm Emanuel, great. Every writer I know, including me, would love to have that gig at the Atlantic. The question that I have had, I've read all of Rahm's pieces. I don't know who's writing them. He's not it's interesting. Rahm is not particularly articulate.
Are you accusing the mayor of having a ghostwriter?
I would expect that he has somebody on the payroll who helps with that, but I don't know.
An editor helps him.
Yeah, and then, but he certainly has the experience. You think about where this guy has been since he was a very young man, and he's worth hearing from. I believe he wants to be president. I believe that he only reluctantly went to become Obama's chief of staff because he saw himself as the first Jewish Speaker of the House, and he would have been a phenomenal. He would have made Nancy Pelosi look like a really, soft soul. So he's doing that. That he took the ABC gig was not surprising. I wondered whether he'd go to CNN or MSNBC, but that would have required a lot of work because you're on, every time something happens, you're on. On ABC, he can go on as he has been, and I think his performances have been sometimes great and sometimes not as good, but he'll be on that panel on Sunday morning with his old friend, from the Clinton administration, George Stephanopoulos. So ABC was perfect for him. He wants to run, what does he want to run for? President? He wants an important cabinet position. He certainly doesn't want a chief of staff kind of position anymore.
Well, us Chicagoans believe that the greatest job in the country is mayor of Chicago. There's nothing higher than mayor of Chicago. So once
but you see, Rahm said that, but when he said it, I never believed it. When Rich Daley said it, and when Rich Daley's father, Mayor Richard J. Daley, said it, you believe them 100%. That you knew that these rumpled D's and Dems guys who seemed unsophisticated to some people really believed that Mayor of Chicago was a pinnacle. But Rahm never believed that. That whole, one of the things that I've been thinking about is 2011, which to me seems like yesterday. I remember I was covering the Blagojevich trial on the day that Rahm was inaugurated, and Rich Daley was Chicago's mayor. He was the best mayor ever. The city was shining, everything was great. Rahm praised him during his inaugural speech. The Daleys were all there. They're smiling because they had this deal, and the deal was that
we all had to vote for Rahm.
Rahm comes back. He becomes mayor. Bill Daley becomes Obama's chief of staff. That didn't work out so great. And there was this deal, and then little by little, we realized that all the tulips and all the beautiful flowering trees and bushes and so on were hiding some real problems. And all of a sudden, Rich Daley, never named, wasn't so great, and so it went through the administration. It was interesting to me because in looking at Lori Lightfoot's speech, she hugged Amy Rule, who I think was in many ways a very good, lovely first lady and mom. She hugs Rahm, and then she basically dispatched Rahm and Amy to, in quotes, the next chapter of your life in one paragraph. And then they were out, and I think you're going to hear a lot. You're already hearing it, that the budget is much worse than he said. The deficit is $200 million off or some big number like that.
It's very reminiscent of what Rahm Emanuel did when he became mayor and then immediately announced that Daley had left him a $600 million structural deficit that he didn't know about. But this is not a structural deficit, I guess. There are differences. But hey, I got to ask you, just in the gossip sense of things, you are aware that Richard M. Daley was on that stage, right?
Yes, smiling and applauding. Looking much older.
But it's the first public appearance that he's made in I don't know how long. And he was a cipher. He came out, sat in his chair, he was barely acknowledged, and he sat behind Rahm Emanuel, and you did see him applauding it from time to time. But to me, that was a major event that Rich Daley showed up for this. Why? Why did he do it?
Oh, I think, well, number one, I really, there's a lot of talk about Rich Daley. I don't think his health is good, but I don't know. So
well, I don't think anybody does know. Actually,
I used to see Rich Daley all around town, especially at restaurants. And you always have the feeling that his check was always picked up by the owner. That's true. I mean, Bill Clinton was the worst offender in that regard. But I think Rich, now I was not at the inauguration, but I followed it very closely, and I read every word of Lori Lightfoot's really excellent speech, I think. Bill Daley, I don't believe, was there. Did you see him?
No, he wasn't.
I saw Rich Daley's daughter, but I didn't.
Yes, yeah.
Now, Bill Daley, that's another subject, and I've written a lot about Bill Daley, but I thought I don't think he's going to be running for anything, soon again. I think he's probably finished.
His political career is over, you think?
Right, I think so.
Yeah. It was interesting also that, Toni Preckwinkle was there. She was introduced and she sat kind of in the middle of the pack and was never heard from again and was barely referred to in what I agree was a very nice speech. But I wanted a paragraph in there about Lori Lightfoot. I mean, about Toni Preckwinkle and how, we were going to work together and all that, but it didn't
well, when you saw the morning after when Jesse Jackson, the Reverend Jesse Jackson, got them together, and you saw them shaking hands, that was very awkward.
It was.
And it was, who would have ever imagined, it's what's so interesting about politics, that you really can't make this stuff up, but who would have ever imagined that Lori Lightfoot, who's never run for office, never held office, would win 50 wards and 70 or 75% of the vote. And Toni Preckwinkle, if she had run for mayor in the last time around, might have been able, what was that, 2015, she might have been able to make it. One thing that I noticed— She might have been able to
knock off Rahm Emanuel.
Right, in telling you, I mentioned to somebody here, one of your producers, that I suffer from insomnia, so I was up in the middle of the night for hours, and I came across something that really surprised me, was that Lori Lightfoot met with Karen Lewis. Now, there's another— ghost maybe is a word, like Rich Daley was a ghost. And Karen Lewis, the last time I saw her was at the Lyric Opera's production of Carmen. And I thought that Karen Lewis, I've interviewed so many people during my long career, and I thought that Karen Lewis was up there in the top 5 in the smarts department. I interviewed her at the Board of Education, at the union's offices in the Merchandise Mart when she was in full flower. I thought a race, if she had run for mayor, and then all of a sudden she gets brain cancer.
It's a tragedy.
I hadn't heard about her, from her, anything, and now she's meeting with Lori Lightfoot, whose first big crisis issue is going to be the teacher's contract.
Where did they meet? Do you know?
They didn't meet in her home. They met I think they probably met on the 5th floor, but I'm not certain.
So I thought that she was out of Chicago. I didn't think she was living in Chicago anymore.
Unless I fell asleep and dreamed it, I read it that she met with her.
I agree with you that she was on the very first show we did and was here several times and was just one of the best guests we ever had.
Right.
Just an amazing, sharp woman, and I just have nothing but respect for her, I have to say. So we're down into our last couple of minutes here. I was going to ask you about Trump pardoning Conrad Black. I'm sure you have a thought or two on that. But we also want to maybe talk about, I mean, just in pure politics, do you believe that Lori Lightfoot has the votes to get Scott Waguespack and her slate in? Do you think she's going to be able to wrestle those 25, 26 votes?
I think if I had to guess, I would say that she does it just as kind of a first, let's be nice to the new mayor act. Scott, I've interviewed him several times, and I know that he's not liked, which to me is a virtue in that group. But he's really seems very honest and very smart. And I thought that if Scott Waguespack, he comes across as so articulate and so honest. I thought if he ran for mayor, he would have had a really good shot at it. And why didn't he? Because he seems to want to be an alderman, which is, unusual.
Well, there's lots of people who want to be aldermen.
Yeah, but not alderman for life. He's really working.
Ed Burke was perfectly happy to be an alderman.
Yeah, but Ed Burke was taking in all that money and all those favors on the side. And Waguespack, he's got as I recall, he's got a couple of children, and I was surprised that he didn't, because there was a groundswell of support for Scott running for mayor, and I think maybe he would have been one of those people who seems very honest, but he would have been ineffectual as mayor. I don't know.
Well, if they keep the finance committee the way it was, he'll basically be a mayor,
right?
Because that's what Ed Burke was.
Yeah,
but I doubt that. I think they'll restructure.
There may be a bloody battle over that, but boy, I hope he gets that job, and let's see what happens. But who could make up the scene where she's addressing the audience of 8,000 people at her inaugural event, and then she turns around and she gazes and she looks at Ed Burke, who is the most well-dressed man I've ever seen in my life. He is, and he was there, with the pocket square and the pinstripe suit and the whole thing. That's fascinating.
And just addressed right at him. This day has to pass. Yeah. Can you briefly address the Conrad Black issue? I mean, what is that about? Why did Trump pardon him? Because
Conrad Black is an old friend. Conrad Black, who I don't remember why I interviewed him, but I did interview him, and I thought, boy, this guy is really smart. And he's an old friend of Donald Trump's. Conrad Black has a lot of friends who are major real estate people. And the most important reason, knowing Donald Trump, is that Conrad Black, who's written excellent books, one of them went while he was in prison.
Oh, really?
But yes, I think it might have been the book about FDR that he wrote while he was in prison. And he's the most articulate and beautiful writer, but he wrote a biography of Donald Trump that's a total puff piece, terrible book called A President Like No Other. So if that, and what would move Donald...
That's true. He is a president like no other.
That is true, but it's not.
Can't argue with that.
But Conrad Black meant it in the most positive way. And what could you do better for Donald Trump? It's better than dollars. It's better than anything. Is to write something that's complimentary,
polish the brand,
and makes him look like he's a real player in American history.
Carol, this is it. This is our last time on TV together, so I'm just so glad we could get you down here one more time. Thank you so much for everything you've done and for everything you've done for us. And I hear you're working on another book.
I am working on another book.
Well, good for you, because I know of like about 5 or 6 that you've written so far. Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton, president out of the White House.
And Kay Graham. And one of my books is turning in will become an FX9 episode series, and that's my first book on Phyllis Schlafly in the RA. So I'm working with the writers. Phyllis Schlafly is being played by Kate Blanchett.
Oh my God.
I had an hour and 34-minute telephone call with her. I felt like I should put on better clothes and makeup and do my hair.
Wonderful.
She's great.
Well, good luck to you, and thanks again for everything.
Thank you.
Carol Felsenthal, ladies and gentlemen, here on Chicago Newsroom. We'll be right back.
This is Chicago Newsroom.
It's Chicago Newsroom. As you know, Ken Davis here on CAN TV, and we are saying goodbye in a really nice way by just having some of the people on the show who have meant a lot to us through the years. Now, Phil Rogers over at Channel 5, I think, was only ever able to be here once, if I'm not mistaken.
I think that's right.
Just one time.
I was here with my friend Paul Meinke.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And it was a wonderful show. But the reason I wanted to have you here is we just go back so far.
40 years.
Oh, yes, 40 years. May of 1979 was when I took over as news director at WBEZ, replacing you.
Me, yeah.
After you had been there for a relatively short period of time.
I was there, and when I knew I was leaving, I walked into Carol Nolan, God rest her soul, an amazing woman, and I said, I know just the person to replace me, and she listened.
And then I got this call from her, and it was just sort of like the most amazing moment of my life. It's like, oh my God, Carol Nolan just called me and asked me to come down for an interview.
And I told that story last night to my wife, and I said, Ken Davis, and I'm not, you didn't know I was going to say this. I said, Ken Davis built BEZ. I said, the WBEZ you see today was built by Ken Davis.
They might be watching.
That is absolutely true.
Well, actually, a very interesting little thing that just occurred to me a couple of days ago is that, we're now 40 years out from Flight 191.
That's right.
And this is a piece of history that nobody knows. WBEZ, one of its first things it ever did in the local news department was cover that, because they just got a tape recorder and you got it and went out there, right?
I do, it's funny because, no, I was not working that day, but I will tell you what I remember that day was I was stuck in traffic on the Kennedy Expressway. I was bumper to bumper traffic and I could see that black smoke plume out there, and it was such a tragedy. But Ken, if you are a reporter and there's a big event going on, you want to be there. And there was no getting there at that point.
Yeah. Well, anyway, so that's how that all happened. And then, we met in the middle of the night over at WLS when I was producing. This is what we're here to talk about media today. And this is the thing, is like, you and I can remember when WLS AM was like the thing in Chicago. And I got this job for $50 a week, producing the all-night talk show with 4 different hosts who rotated every week. And I would call people up and say, we want you to be on our program on WLS AM. And they would say, I'll be there. Tell me when. Well, your segment is at 3:45 a.m. on Sunday night, Monday morning. And they wouldn't hesitate. It's like, as long as I'm on WLS.
Yeah, they're going to go on this blowtorch. They want to be on it. Yeah.
I want to be on the 50,000-watt blowtorch. Yeah, the kahuna of the Corn Belt.
Yeah.
Anyway, so you went on to WBBM radio as a news writer, and then after a few years, anyway, you ended up in television. I just wrote this down today. You started at MAQ in 1991.
That's right.
We are senior citizens.
We are. And don't think I don't know that. It's always, and Ken, you know this, when somebody says to you, a new employee, a new reporter, says, oh my God, I grew up watching you. And I was like, I wish you wouldn't have said that.
Just forget. I know you're trying to be nice, but shut up.
Yeah.
So, I gotta tell you, I saw the other night, I literally just happened to be clicking around and I saw this incredible piece you did about river rescues on Channel 5.
Those are amazing guys.
And it's online, you can see it. Phil Rogers, Channel 5, River Rescue, and you should watch it. It's like, 3-4 minutes long?
Yeah, it was 2.5 minutes.
2.5 minutes long.
Yeah.
And I'm just sitting there thinking, this is almost a piece of television that I feel like I'm watching a museum piece here in a way. These are not, these kind of richly produced, out on location, probably multi-camera shoots.
No, that was one camera. It was one camera with a GoPro. Yeah.
It was amazing to watch, and you just don't see much of that anymore. And I guess that's because of the economics of local television.
Well, they let us do it. Channel 5 does it, and in fact, you will always see a third segment piece on Channel 5 every night. That's really great television at 10 o'clock. And whether it's an investigative unit piece or a larger piece, just from a feature piece on something else, consumer piece, a lot of those. Channel 5 is really committed to those, and that's one of the reasons I'm so proud to work there, and my bosses really believe in that kind of television. But you're right, it's, there's concern in the internetization of the industry that they think nobody has an attention span anymore.
Well, 2.5 minutes. How can anybody watch something for 2.5 minutes?
Oh my gosh, that's an eternity. Yeah, but it's it's when you can tell a story.
So, how are you feeling? You're closer to the end than the beginning of your career. Let's put it that way.
I want you to know,
how are you feeling about it?
As I told you, I have concerns about the industry, but I love the industry. I love news. I love news.
Yeah.
And if no one, you just don't. Ken, a week ago today, I was riding around the Indianapolis Motor Speedway grounds on a golf cart with Mario Andretti driving.
You were?
Now, how many people can say
driving a golf cart?
Yeah, he was driving a golf cart and I was riding around with him, and we were doing a story on Mario Andretti, and he drove us around. I mean, how many people can? I mean, he's one of my heroes, and how many people can say they rode around with Mario Andretti? And I flew with Jim Lovell, the astronaut. He flew me to. I mean, I've just gotten to do amazing things.
I was just refreshing myself just yesterday, looking at talk about changes in the industry. You spent 2 months in the Gulf,
in the Gulf
War,
Kuwait,
Persian Gulf.
in Iraq.
I mean, no local television station would ever do that.
That was extraordinary.
Yeah.
The thing that I'm most concerned about is that because of what's going on after the Fox Newsization of the industry, people now believe that they can lower those walls that we are supposed to keep around ourselves, and I still think those walls are more important than ever. And let me give you an example. Well, let me take you back a decade, and I will remember when Barack Obama was running for Senate, and I was on Chicago Tonight, and the whole panel was, oh my gosh, isn't this wonderful, and this guy is going to be great, and I mean, they hadn't had the election yet, and these were reporters, and I remember right in the middle of the show, I said, hey, wait a minute, what are you doing here? We're supposed to be going through this guy's trash cans. What are you doing? So the next day, I'm out at Midway Airport with Mark Lamette, the great producer, the former producer at Channel 5, and we're staking out John Burge. He was coming in for a deposition. Who comes up the escalator but Barack Obama? He looks at me and he says, why are you busting my balls on Chicago Tonight? I said, I was just doing my job. Right. And he laughed and he said, I know that. Here's now you take that example from then, it is so much worse now. And people now in the business think we can lower our shields. We can make clear where we stand. No, we can't. And nothing makes me crazier than hearing Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I'm not even real clear much about her, but it drives me nuts. She's been given a cute nickname, AOC. No, you don't get a cute nickname from the news media. Okay, and Ken, I'm going to ask you, and you're going to remember this. I only need to bring up one example, Carol Moseley Braun. She went in as the Valentine recipient of every news organization in Chicago, and it was a train wreck when she became a United States Senator, and we all remember how it ended. So you're not supposed to fall in love with anybody. And you know, the old City News motto is more important now than ever.
We've seen a little bit of that with Harold Washington too. I mean, the news media was clearly all of us, and I was one of them. We're definitely on his side. Well, there was just no way around it.
Everybody wanted it to turn out well. I think that was probably true with Barack Obama. Everybody just wanted it to turn out well. This may be true with Lori Lightfoot. Okay, but the thing is, that's for somebody else to do. Okay, and I will admit to you, I get very Amish about the news. I really do. I mean, when I talk to journalism students and people, I say, look, you're entering a noble calling and you're going to have a great life, but you are not going to put bumper stickers on your car, you're not going to put signs in your yard, you're not going to wear pins, you are not ever going to let anyone know where you stand
in
on
newspaper terms. Everybody's a columnist.
Yeah.
Nobody's a reporter.
And I think it's dangerous because it is reinforcing the stereotype that the Fox Newses of the world are trying to paint of the legitimate news media. I don't use that term. What do they call it? The mainstream media? I don't use that. No. I use legitimate media. And the legitimate media cannot fall into that trap.
I saw a really interesting example of this just by accident last week, because last week on the show we had Flint Taylor, and we sat and talked with him about his book for a solid hour.
And an amazing life he has.
An amazing, incredible life. If any of us could have even 2% of the contribution that he's made. But it was so interesting to me to see in this 500-page book, you don't have to turn more than 3 pages before you see his interaction with local news television. And how local television news really helped him break that story open. And you know, I can't help but believe that it's not like that today, because it took commitments on the parts of the stations to commit people to this for long periods of time.
Yeah.
And people with institutional memory, because it just took years. I mean, it was 13 years, or well, actually closer to 30 if you count. Anyway, a long time between the first filing and the reparations.
And I want you to remember one thing that's really important about that story, and that is that people forget. And again, we try to go for clean, good guy, bad guy stories.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
And that story wasn't one of those,
not like
because
that,
if you remember, one of the real problems, and what I had to keep reminding people constantly, John Burge in some cases was torturing guilty people.
Right.
Okay,
right.
So now there is an effort to lionize these people. No. This guy was a victim of John Burge, but he was still a really bad guy.
Right.
Okay,
but he was still mistreated.
Oh, he was still mistreated,
and
according to the Constitution, that was wrong. But that doesn't mean now we trot this guy out as some kind of a hero. And see, that's the problem I have, because we try to make everything clean. We try to either put you in the good camp or the bad camp. We try, and you know, you can't do that. And it's and we've got to make sure that we confine ourselves to the four walls of what the truth really is. And sometimes that's difficult.
You know, it's been an interesting run for me here doing this for 10 years, because we've had a whole variety of people on the show, but when we have honest-to-God reporters on the show, I will not ask. So, you know, what do you think is going to happen with Lori Lightfoot? You know, those kinds of questions. What's the outlook for Lori Lightfoot? Because it's not fair to ask that question, because you put them in a position where they try to answer it, and I don't even want the question on the table. It's not for them to answer that question. It's for them to build the building blocks that help us see the full edifice. And I totally agree with you, as two aging gentlemen, that is something that's really being lost.
Well, and remember, we're going into this now. Lori Lightfoot, who I've known for, gosh, 20 years at least, because I knew her when she was a federal prosecutor, and a really good one. I think that this could be an extremely exciting time for the city of Chicago. A big kick in the pants, not unlike when you and I watched Jane Byrne become the mayor. And I'll never forget, but you know, Mike Royko writing that column the next morning, and he said, "You did it, you wild and crazy Chicagoans." Remember that?
Yes.
Well, then it had rather marginal results. Okay, Jane Byrne
capitulated.
Yeah, and so, although I had deep affection for her, I had a very soft spot for Jane Byrne. And in fact, Ken, I'll tell you something. Every now and then I would just call her up and talk to her.
Did you really?
In the later years. She
Did
would
you?
never do
long
anything.
after she was out of office?
Oh, not long before she died even. And
oh, that's so interesting.
She would, you know, she answered the phone, and I still had her number in my Rolodex, and I would call her, and she would never do an interview. I always wanted her to do an interview. One of the last ones I tried to get her to do was about Taste of Chicago and what it had become, because she said it was a complete anathema to what she thought, and it had become something terrible, and she thought it should be shut down and all this stuff. And
the first one was just on Michigan Avenue.
It was on Michigan Avenue, yeah. I mean, she was such an interesting person.
Yeah.
And when you watch the train wreck that it became, although it was amazing a time for news. Yeah. And I mean, it was not unlike when Harold was mayor, although a different version. Harold had noble intentions and was being roadblocked by Verdoliak and Ed Burke. Yeah. People forget.
Did she ever talk to you later on about why she moved into Green and Green?
No.
Was that just a stunt?
We never talked about that, although God, remember that. But I want you to know, I always had a very soft spot in my heart for her.
I don't blame you at all. I mean, well, you know, that was when I took over from you. Jane Byrne had just been elected, and I was at one of her very earliest press conferences, and I had the temerity to ask her a question, and she just like stopped and looked at me and said, "Who are you?"
Which is a wonderful feeling when you remember the Chicago Press Club.
I fell into my chair and said, I'm with WBEZ. I said, "What's that?" Well, you own it.
You own it. You control the budget.
Right. At that time, it was the city. It was a Board of Education station.
Do you know, Ken, when I first I moved to Chicago in October of 1978. Yeah. 2 months later, John Gacy breaks. Yeah. A week or two after that, the blizzard of '79 hits. You know, Jane Byrne is elected mayor a couple of weeks after that because of the snowstorm, and then in May, Flight 191 goes down. I mean, that was in the first 6 months I was in Chicago. I thought, man, is this a news town? And we were still having the rumblings of the Mirage Tavern, which was one of the greatest pieces of journalism ever done in Chicago by Pam Zeckman.
So bookmark. So that's okay then. That's your idea of good journalism.
What
that's not gotcha journalism.
Oh, not at all. I thought the
okay.
Mirage was miraculous journalism.
I did too, but I've always felt a little bit guilty about my enthusiasm for it because you know it is a kind of an entrapment.
And in fact, I'll put in a plug for Pam. Her book is out of print, but go to your public library, get Pam Zeckman's book, and read about the Mirage Tavern. I did that recently, and it is first of all, her book is terrific, and it was such an amazing story.
Stunning, just absolutely stunning. Yeah.
But what I don't understand is why you're not doing this anymore. People, where's my camera? I am such a believer in Ken Davis. I want you to know, Ken Davis is like
much more than I am.
Is like a North Star of journalism in Chicago, and I just want you to know that I'm sad to see you leaving. As I told you before we started, this reminds me a little of when Johnny Carson was going on, and so everyone is trooping to the desk here to.
Stop. Just stop. Get out. No, you know, the reason that we did this was because I am just a rock solid believer in journalism in all of its forms, and I just wanted to try to have journalists and people who are associated with journalism come here and talk about their craft.
Well, and it's a scary time we're in. If ever there was a time we need great journalism, we do. And by the way, quickly, we just came off of 8 years that were not such great times for
watch this, folks. You got 15 seconds. Phil.
For dealing with City Hall. He was not a friend of the media, and I hope Lori Lightfoot has a very different approach.
Beautiful. I thought it was about 12 seconds. Phil Rogers from Channel 5, thank you so much for dropping by.
Thank you.
And good luck to you, whatever that means. You've been watching Chicago Newsroom here on CAN TV. I'm Ken Davis. Don't forget, here's where you go to see all of our past shows. We're going to leave that site up and active for a while so you can see those shows. And we'll be back next week with a whole bunch more people talking about their lives in media. And I hope you'll watch that too. Thanks a lot. Bye for now.